Christian schools are a valuable means of educating the next generation of students.
Christian schools can be poor examples of the nature and person of Christ Jesus.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you for joining us today. And as Mark said, this is a very unique program. We talk about a lot of things on this program. We're glad that you tuned in for today's topic. It's a special one regarding Christian education. Before we get into our subject, you've already heard those who've begun the program by making opening remarks, but you haven't met who they are or what they do. I'd like for you to meet the entire panel at this time. We're going to ask that they tell us who they are and what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxon. I'm president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas, affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
And I am Mel Robeck, Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I am also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. We've got a great panel assembled, and we have a number of educators here on the panel, which is good because that's our topic of discussion for today. I begin with a quote. Here it is. There's a real profound sense among a large part of the Christian population that the rug is being pulled out from under them. They feel their moral certitudes and sense of community are being ridiculed. That is according to Elizabeth Shackman Hurd, a professor of politics and religion at Northwestern University. Recently, a national newspaper asked people to share their experiences of a Christian school education. Responses varied widely, with some giving high praise while others criticized their experience because of boundaries or expectations in which they did not believe. In some cases, teachers were praised for being great models while others were impugned for their narrow-mindedness. While some of these statements could be made about secular schools and teachers as well, many of the criticism revolved around doctrinal and behavioral boundaries. We would like to ask our panelists today to consider these following questions concerning this subject. First of all, are Christian schools, as some suggest, bastions of racism, sexism, and homophobia? And if they are not, why is this charge so frequently made? Another question. Do you believe that teachers in Christian schools are adequately trained to provide doctrinal instruction to their students? And if they are not, what would you suggest for their preparation? And then the third question, is sending their children to Christian schools an appropriate way for parents to respond when their own faith is challenged by culture or politics? That's our subject for today. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program. We go back to Dr. Luxton, and you are an educator.
I am.
In fact, you're the president of a university, Andrews University. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think?
Sure. And first of all, I'd like to define when I talk about Christian schools here, I'm talking about K right through to doctoral level. I'm going to talk about the whole span here. One of the questions related to why is all the criticism out there, and I don't know totally. I do think that, first of all, we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And secondly, I do think that there are there's all kind of other agendas that are out there when a lot of these attacks are made that may have something to do with reality and may have not a lot to do with reality. But I want to really focus on the positive, why Christian schools and why it really matters, because I think it is really actually vital for our community to have Christian education as an option in our society. it's impossible to deliver education in a vacuum. It doesn't matter whether you're in a public university or a Christian university, there is a frame in which that education is delivered. There was never no frame, right? And that is almost the hidden education that happens in any classroom. It may not be stated, sometimes it may be stated, but it does impact the way, the worldview of what the children or students are hearing and listening and understanding. And to me, creating an environment where the Christian worldview stands alongside an education in a different discipline provides a wholeness of education that you are not going to get if you're in a public environment. That relates to values, it relates to doctrines, it relates to all kinds of things. That holism to me is extremely vital, and to me that is really what it is all about. So I think you take that away and you create an even bigger vacuum in society when it comes to faith. Just one more thing, when we do our surveys and other faith-based as well, and one of the questions that is asked, and this is from an external group saying, what is the greatest influence on your faith journey? Right? Family and friends, understandably at the top, but the third one is usually a teacher. And that comes beyond a pastor, beyond any other faith group, it's a teacher.
All right, thank you very much. Reverend Plumley, you also started the program with a statement. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yes, and please, I don't want to be heard to say that there's no place for Christian schools. Heavens to Betsy, the congregation that I serve in Fort Worth, one of the pioneer leaders of the congregation was the guy that got the first public schools started in the city of Fort Worth. And two of the ministers who preached there back in the post-Civil War era started a little college that's now become Texas Christian University, where I went to school. So we kind of are into education and have been in our congregation for a long time. I simply said what I did at the beginning because we need to be cautious that sometimes our desire to set up separate institutions is a desire, is something that ends up weakening public schools, but also sometimes comes out of desires that are far from holy, far from Christ-like, and that's one of the things I wanted to call attention to is the fact, and I think it's a provable fact that so many Protestant private K through 12 schools in this country, if you trace their history, they began in the era of desegregation of public schools, which means that they were an effort by church folk to keep or to resegregate the schools, and I think that is a black mark on those schools from their very birth, and I think that today we see racism in some of those schools, we see homophobia in some of those schools, we see all sorts of things that are not Christ-like.
All right, thank you very much. We have some other educators as well. All of you are educators to some extent, if you're a pastor, a teacher, administrator. But let's go to Dr. Troval. You also are associated with Christian school.
Yeah, I am, and my kids have gone to private elementary schools as well, Lutheran elementary schools, as well as a public school. And I think that the thing, Tom, you bring out a little bit is that it's not a univocal story. Because, for instance, in the tradition I'm in, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the first thing that the Germans did when they came is they established a church, and then they established a school next to the church, and nearly all the churches had some form of school. And it was clearly a way to protect the tradition that they came from, both the Christian tradition as well as the German culture. And but it certainly was not a reaction to in any way to segregation, at least, because a lot of those schools existed. But which well, I don't want to make too general of a statement, but there are different reasons people have established Christian schools. And where I'm going is that I find that in a school such as Concordia, I agree with Andrea about there's a set of values that's being articulated wherever you go. And all we're trying to do is be open about what that is, and that parents and students can make the decision about coming to Concordia or to a particular school. And I've always argued that I find that there's a greater freedom at somewhere like our university than there is even at a secular university, mostly because we say you can actually talk about your faith here. You don't have to hide it. You can speak about it. You can disagree with the professor or with the school about your religious beliefs. All of that. I mean, I welcome agnostics, atheists, people from all religious traditions to have an engaging dialogue about the meaning of life from these different perspectives. And those are questions and things that you can't always talk about. Now, I'm obviously talking at a higher ed level, but I think it's also true that as long as parents are not putting their kids in a school simply to withdraw and escape from society, it's a good place to prepare people in a safe place, ultimately, I think, for public service. And I think that Christian school serves a good purpose in our society.
All right, thank you very much. Bishop Olson, you represent, at least your church represents, a very large parochial school system, the largest in the world.
In the United States.
Well, in the United States at least, yes.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on this subject?
I have a lot of them. I think the United States bishops, about 30 years ago, put out a document sort of as a vision statement, if you will, on Catholic education and at all levels. And it's to teach as Jesus taught. And I really think that's really the point for an examination of conscience for our schools, of their character, to avoid the things that Tom pointed out. And I think in our history, we have a mixed history on that. There are some schools which welcomed numbers just to avoid integration, and other of schools would not take people as a cover for to avoid desegregation. In the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., the Catholic schools were desegregated in 1948, 6 years before Brown versus Board of Education. So I think it like everything, it's, it involves human beings. There's a mixed thing, but that to me is the examination that schools have to do. I think as a Catholic school or in Christian schools in general, I don't think we should define ourselves by what we're not. And there's a tendency to do that in the United States setting where it's a marketplace always, and education is even something that's thought of as sort of a consumer approach. So we have to define ourselves by who we are and what we are, and I think to teach as Jesus taught. And I think the transcendentals that should guide it are truth, beauty, goodness. And in along with it, education is a human formation that's discipleship. Really, I think that's there has to be service at the orientation of in our faculty, in our administration, and among our students, and also the parents. I think parents are educated as well, brought into the whole school community, and it's not just the children isolated from the parents. So otherwise, we become just a private school and lose our Christian character.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Matthews.
Yes, I want to pick up on what Bishop Michael's mentioning about the parents and just kind of focus on them, and also to look at it from K through 12th grade. Mm-hmm. I think biblically it's a parent's responsibility to raise their children, and Christian schools are an extension of that responsibility from parents' perspective. So I think I think Christian schools are a great thing. I think the option should be there. When I looked at the information about the survey, you're going to have challenges in the secular schools and private schools, Christian schools, and when the article mentioned the boundaries and the criticisms that revolve around doctrine and behavioral boundaries. Those things are to be expected. At the end of the day, the school is an extension, the Christian school is an extension of, it should be an extension of what the parents are teaching at the home, and parents should have the choice to do so. And I will quickly say that in terms of discipleship, there needs to be discipleship in the home from the parents. And no school is perfect, and we're going to have flaws where we always say we're born again with birth defects. So, you're going to have challenges there where we go.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Robeck, glad to have you here. You're also an educator.
I am.
What is your perspective on the subject, please?
Well, I'd like to say that at higher education level, I'm far less concerned about directions things go than I am at the K through 12. My wife and I have 4 sons, and we sent them all to public school, largely because we could not afford private school. I was working for a private Christian school at the time, not as a teacher, but as a janitor. And, I just didn't make enough money going to seminary and having at least 2 kids at that time in a place where they could have gone to school. So, I worry about the fact that those with money can send their children to a Christian school, and those without, maybe if there are scholarships, they can send them, but otherwise they are left out of a Christian education at that level. I also think that, for Patsy and me, we had devotions in our home. Our children were in church with us all the time. So there was this concern to have the spiritual development there. And I also felt that by going to public school, they were mixing with people in a real world. It wasn't an artificially imposed world with all of these kinds of boundaries and so forth. We have our boundaries. Our church has our boundaries. The boys understood what those boundaries were, and there wasn't a lot of kickback on the fact that there was either boundary or doctrinal instruction. And what we found was that there were a variety of very fine teachers, including Christian teachers in the public school system, who were making a significant contribution.
Right.
I would say one of the significant things that Christian schools do have going for them is the fact that they have fewer discipline problems than are found in public schools, where you have so many people coming from so many varied family backgrounds that it's really hard to control a classroom. And I feel very strongly that public schools need all the help they can get when it comes to that. So, but I am concerned. I think Tom has raised a very good question in the fact that these schools can become bastions of, in the case of the one I felt it was way too American, way too far to the right, politically, to think, how do we hold this country together? But it's also the case that racism is a huge problem, and I would guess that homophobia is as well. Let me just say that this is nothing new. The late 19th century, we saw the rise of Darwinism and young people leaving the farm and going to the city, coming back and not being able to speak the same language as their parents, and that worried them. That was the beginning of the Bible school movement. So this is another issue related to how the culture is moving and how it can be helped.
And thank you for bringing that up as well. Sometimes we forget that the history, and you would know a lot about that since that's kind of one of your fortes, looking back at church development and growth. The history of the development of Bible schools and Christian schools, it used to be, go ahead,
No,
Bishop.
I'd say just as well, immigration as
True.
well.
Yes.
I mean, the German schools were German schools in the Midwest, and also the Irish immigrants who were a little more in favor of mainstreaming, but the issue of losing their faith in things like Bible reading in public schools and the King James Version and the theology of it, which also prompted Catholic education for the sense of immigration and maintaining their faith.
We used to talk about the three-legged stool, home, church, and school, making that balance. And that's where a lot of churches have seen the importance of Christian education, adding that dimension. Yes.
I also think that because we label these schools Christian schools, and they are Christian schools, I think the expectation from society is really high. And if there are some challenges, if we have racism or other things that are anti-biblical going on in those schools, it's a real letdown. But I always tell our church family, listen, we are the church of crises are ahead. It would be perfect if we weren't in it. So,
it's true. We're out of time for this segment. I wish we had some more time. We might have to come back to this subject later. But we're going to take a break right now. There's a message I'd like for you to stand by for, and we'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Like Mark, I would also like to thank you for writing. I do look forward to receiving your cards and letters or emails. We get a lot of really good suggestions about what to talk about on this program. In fact, we've just considered 2 or 3 of them in the last few weeks as a result of letters being sent to us suggesting what you would like to hear. We're going to go to our summations for this program now. Let's begin with Reverend Plumley. You're first.
Thank you. Through this conversation about Christian schools, I was reminded of the thoughts of Addison and Randolph Clark, a couple of really old guys who were young men in my city and decided that they were going to form a school that originally has become Texas Christian University. They would not, however, put the word Christian in the original title. And it only became TCU because the Christian churches in Texas bought it. But their thought was that a school should be known as Christian only because of its service and its example, and not because not simply because of the name that's on the door.
All right, thank you. Dr. Matthews.
Yes, the Barna Group is a wonderful, in my estimation, a wonderful research organization. And they report that 85% of parents believe that it's their responsibility to raise their kids and to teach them biblical truths and help them with their spirituality. But most of those parents don't spend time doing it. So I think that's really a big part of the problem. So in many ways, parents look to the church and to the Christian schools to do what their primary job is. And I think we just need to amalgamate all of those and hope that our kids will do well in public or private, Christian or non-Christian schools.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Trovall. Your summation, please.
Are Christian schools worth the trouble? Absolutely, they're worth the trouble. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has the second largest school system next to Roman Catholics, who are first in the United States. Always been committed to it. And I hope everyone knows out there, teachers, private school teachers often get very low pay. They work long hours, and they are doing it because they care about their mission and the students. And my wife taught in public ed for years, also in private ed, and I mean, I just want to commend all teachers wherever they're teaching, because this is such an important moral formation for our culture and society.
Thank you, Dr. Trovall. Now, Dr. Robeck.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Carl, and I agree with you 100% on that. I do want to put a plug in for public schools, though. I still think that, I mean, public schools in LA are really in trouble right now, and part of it has to do with this competition between for-profit schools and public schools, and taking away tax dollars from the public school system. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm quite concerned about that, actually. I'm also concerned about church-related schools, either that do not come up to standards that they ought to come, or are too narrowly defined in such a way that it puts other people in the community down. And I think we have to be very careful about that. In spite of that, I would still vote for both public and private schools.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Luxton, your summation, please.
Yeah, the Seventh-day Adventist Church education was critical right at its foundation. Schools, I think we have worldwide the largest Protestant system of education. And that wasn't to escape anything in a way, but it was part of the whole culture of creating an environment where church and home and school all work together. So there was a congruence in the message and the environment in which young people grew up and developed. And I, speaking for myself, I do not believe that I would be where I am now had it not been for the influence of Christian education. Both Seventh-day Adventist, and I did my PhD at a Catholic university. And I think all of that has immensely framed the way I think about life and the world.
All right, thank you very much. And Bishop Olson.
I think as we look in the Gospels, we see Jesus' example. When he would go to a community, he would heal and he would teach. And one of the greatest ways to treat somebody with dignity is to educate people. One of the greatest indignities you can do to someone is refuse to teach them. And I think ignorance is one of the pathways to poverty. It's a pathway to isolation. And an important ministry of the church has to be to teach. And to teach not just doctrine, but also to teach in human formation, according to the true, the good, and the beautiful. I think for Christian schools to flourish, we have to define ourselves not by what we're not, but really by who we serve. In other words, by who we are. And that is in Christ, so that the institution serves the mission, and the mission doesn't serve the institution, which requires attentiveness to the signs of the times, as well as to the traditions that we have, both in faith and in reason.
All right, thank you very much. This has been a very informative discussion. I've learned a lot here. I hope you have too. And you who have been watching, we're glad you've tuned in. Perhaps this is a discussion you can have in your church or in your community. If you have a Christian school or some religious school that you're associated with, perhaps you learned something here today, and we hope that you'll continue in success. Well, we're glad that you are here today. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. For now, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And so now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, or however you've watched us today, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you